What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and we're talking about some Space Marines today because it feels like as much as numbers, maths, and the GW design team tried to convince us that Space Marines are actually a baby army for babies and only played by players who are very new to the faction who have no chance of ever winning a game, they keep coming back to prove us wrong. Because today we're talking about Ryan Averill and his incredible 5-0 win at the Riverside Classic GT using pure Ultramarines.
We march from a crag!
That's right, the boys in the blue are back at the top of their game. Now, before we get into the video, I want to throw out a couple quick announcements. First off, Warhammer 40k Darktide is in its pre-order beta. If you have pre-ordered the game, you can go play it right now in a limited way, and I have been live streaming the hell out of it over on my purple channel, TacticalTortoisetv, so you can go check me out over there. There's also some new infrastructure in the Discord server for playing Darktide games with other community members, so we're going to be doing that quite a bit. I'm not sponsored to talk about it or anything, but I just really want you to come hang out with me while I play Darktide. And as always, if you enjoy my 40k content, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, do all that YouTube stuff. You know the drill. I believe in you. And let's get into this. As always, when we do a tournament tech talk video like this one, we're going to talk about the event that the list played at. The list in particular, in this case, Ryan Averill's Ultramarines, and all of the matchups that it played to take it to its top place at that event. The event in question was the Riverside Classic GT held at GMI Games in Riverside, California by the Xenos Petting Zoo competitive 40k team. This one was a 33-player GT that used Frontline Gaming's player-optimized terrain style of terrain placement. This can have some big impact on how the game ends out, but it typically depends on who wins the roll-off for that player-placed terrain setup, and if you're experienced in the format. You can definitely get caught out when it comes to optimal terrain placement. But the big upside of player-placed terrain, even though it does have some idiosyncrasies, is that it does let you play kind of whatever style of game that you're trying to play. Because if you're not that worried about line-of-sight blocking terrain or worried about getting caught up by line-of-sight blocking terrain or movement blocking terrain in places in your deployment zone where you don't want it, you can just plan to place the terrain around that consideration. And that is, I believe, exactly what Ryan has done today, because his version of an Ultramarines list is incredibly different than Ultramarines lists we've seen in the past that have been very heavily focused on forward deployment and then using redeploys like rapid redeployment to pull units back into his deployment zone. That's not what's happening today, because this is a very heavily armored spearhead full of Ultramarines. So let's get into it. The list started with a pretty standard Ultramarines battalion, that bringing a captain with a combi melta upgraded with the Imperium's sword and Sanctic Halo. We also have a Primaris Tech Marine who is a Master of the Forge using Rites of War to give objective secured in an aura, and the Seal of Oath to get rerolls to core units against a particular enemy unit. In addition, there are 2 Incursor squads and an Infiltrator squad to fill out the troop slot and give a lot of utility, as well as 3 Redemptor Dreadnoughts in the Elite slot, all of them with Macroplasma Incinerators, Onslaught Gatling Cannons, and upgraded with Icarus Rocket Pods. These are going to be the primary beneficiaries of that Seal of Oath. They have a high volume of shooting to get rerolls to wound against one particular enemy, whether it's a big knight or even if it's just a large keystone unit that's in your opponent's list, something like a Black Ring of Damnation Terminator squad coming out of Chaos Space Marines. All of those are going to get gunned down by these Redemptor Dreadnoughts. We can even see situations like Chaos Demons that have particular greater demons that you want to be rerolling against, and having the Seal of Oath plus these 3 Redemptor Dreadnoughts gives you a very solid, pretty survivable fire base of firepower that you're going to be able to deliver those rerolls. Speaking of rerolls, we also have the big man himself in a Supreme Command Detachment, Robut Gilliman. He's the Warlord of the army to unlock his additional command points, but has left his Warlord trait at home because it is very bad. That said, he is a late game beatstick, and especially getting through 3 Redemptor Dreadnoughts before you get to Gilliman himself can be a tough ask for a lot of factions. And if you come in to try to engage the Redemptor Dreadnoughts in melee to prevent them from shooting at you, Gilliman will punish you by hitting you with his enormous sword. Next up, we have one more detachment in the army, including a single model. This is an Ultramarine Superheavy detachment, bringing an Astraeus Superheavy tank, 2 Iron Hail Heavy Stubbers, Twin Heavy Bolters, and 2 Plasma Eradicators on this thing. For those who aren't familiar with this 550-point monstrosity, the Astraeus is one of the most powerful super heavy combat tanks in Warhammer 40k. And that's in no small part due to the fact that it has incredibly useful profiles on a bunch of its ranged attacks. This thing is a 30 wound, toughness 8, 2+ save, effectively 1+ save thanks to Armor of Contempt beast that comes equipped with Void Shields, giving it a situational 5+ invulnerable save and the ability to eat an additional 6-ish wounds before actually taking hull damage. Void Shields are a pretty interesting mechanic. The Astraeus has 2 of them, and each one of them effectively gives it 3 floating wounds on top of its regular wounds count. Each of the Void Shields suffers up to 3 damage and then collapses, but excess damage from a single attack does not carry over, meaning that even if this thing got hit with a railgun for 12 damage, the Void Shield would collapse, but no additional damage would be dealt to the hull. This means that the Astraeus is a little bit more survivable to big, heavy attacks than it would be to small arms shooting. Although, that small arms shooting is generally not going to get through the 2+ armor save with Armor of Contempt, saving characteristic that the tank has innately. In addition, those weapon profiles I mentioned earlier are a huge draw for the Astraeus, including those 2 plasma eradicators that are very similar in profile to the macroplasma incinerators equipped to the Redemptor Dreadnoughts. At their overcharged profile, each is capable of firing D6 shots at strength 8 AP4, a flat 3 damage. On top of that, it also has a twin macro accelerator cannon, a 12-shot strength 8 AP2, 3 damage weapon. If we're talking about a metagame where we are worried about huge bricks of Terminators, Tzeentch Flamers, and other 3-wound models, a weapon loadout like the one that the Astraeus has is incredibly strong. And with just the high variety of strength 8, decent AP, decent damage weapons, it's also good at hitting heavily armored targets. The fact that it's also basically impossible for small infantry to kill means that even lightly armored targets, it's going to be able to shoot at every turn of the game without really having to worry about it. On top of all these benefits, the vehicle also has the fly keyword, allowing it to pass over terrain if it needs to, which is good because the model is absolutely enormous. With that Tech Marine in the list, it can get +1 to hit, so it's firing a massive number of 12 plus 2d6, probably 3 damage shots, all of which are hitting on 2s. Combined with other Ultramarine abilities like the redeploy, using rapid redeployment, this thing can jump around the table, use its fast movement and large model to get cheeky lines of sight into your opponent's deployment zone on turn 1, potentially get some Alpha Strike damage in, but generally be able to pile damage out throughout the mid-game. Their 3 Redemptor Dreadnoughts and a bevy of Incursors and Infiltrators can push up the middle of the table, getting objective secured from the Primaris Tech Marine, and try to dominate a center objective. At that stage, your opponent is forced to come out and fight the Ultramarines army, which is exactly where the Macroplasma and Plasma Eradicators from those Astraeus and all those Redemptor Dreadnoughts want you to be able to shoot your army absolutely to pieces. And, worst case scenario, late game, you do have an Imperium Sword Space Marine Captain and Rabuk Gilliman to clean up in melee as well. Overall, this is what is clearly a pretty well-rounded list, even more so because it fought a variety of high-power meta armies in its path to victory at the Riverside Classic GT. So let's get into talking about all of the armies that it fought. Round 1 was against Daniel Redehace with his very classic Chaos Space Marine build. This is a mixed Chaos build bringing a Tzeentch Demon's Vanguard, including a Changecaster and 3 units of Flamers, a Black Legion Supreme Command with Abaddon the Despoiler, and that followed up with an Iron Warriors Patrol, including an Apostle and Master of Possession, alongside a unit of Accursed Cultists, 10 Chaos Terminators with Mark of Slaanesh, 10 Possessed using the Black Rune of Damnation, so interestingly, that relic not on the Chaos Terminators, alongside 4 Vikers with the Icon of Tzeentch. Interesting combo of these bikers as well. The Tzeentch icon does let them shrug some damage, which keeps the unit alive, but also gives them an additional point of AP on the range attacks. And the fact that the unit has 2 combi flamers and a bunch of regular bolter shots means that it can put out pretty decent damage, especially against medium armor save infantry. That wasn't enough to allow them to damage this Ultramarines brick, however, as it ended up as an 81-76 victory for Ryan. Round 2, Ryan was paired up against Robert Ramos and his Farsight Enclaves. This included Commander Farsight himself, an Enforcer Battlesuit commander, to give objective secured to several Crisis Battlesuit teams, 2 teams of 5, with a bunch of marker drones alongside, Carnivores to fill out the troops allotment, 2 units of Crute Hounds, as well as a Riptide Battlesuit, and 2 Sunshark Bombers. I would be a little bit worried about that Riptide Battlesuit being able to use its jump, shoot, jump ability to deal damage to the Astraeus or the Redemptor Dreadnoughts before being able to jump back behind cover into safety. That said, Tau can suffer on the primary objective score if they can't do enough damage to your army, and I think that could be how this game ended up going down. With those Crisis Battlesuit teams committed, they can probably knock out the units in the front of the Ultramarines formation relatively easily. However, the swingback is going to kill most, if not all, of those Crisis Battlesuits. And once the Crisis Battlesuits are down, you're just left with characters, the Riptide Battlesuit, and Sunshark Bombers, none of which are units that hold objectives particularly well. So if they weren't able to get through those Redemptor Dreadnoughts and the Astraeus and the characters that do get objective secured from that Rites of War aura, it could be very difficult for them to actually succeed and come back on primary in the late game. That ended up being a relatively one-sided 90-60 victory to Ryan. And I think it's fair to say that Ryan is pretty much an expert in this Tau matchup, because in the next round, round 3, he was up against RJ Abad, also playing a Farsight Enclaves Battalion. This is a very similar looking list, but had a little bit of a unique flair, including a Kroot Shaper, as well as a Cadre Fireblade with the Talisman of Arthas Moloch to give him a deny. Not very useful in this Ultramarines list that had no Psychers whatsoever, but still a pretty cool piece of technology. Commander Firesight, as well as a Cold Star Commander. This one brought a Breacher team and 2 Kroot teams. Again, 2 bricks of Crisis battlesuits, a Riptide battlesuit, 2 Sunshark bombers, and 1 Devilfish for that Breacher team. This game looked like it went very much the same, with Ryan scoring the special, unique, secret objective of Warhammer 40k, which is to score exactly 69 points in a game, which he did, which is significantly higher than RJ's 38. That put him into the semifinals, where he was paired with Kyle Perry and his Ulthway Battalion. This list brought 2 Seer Councils, one of 3 Warlock Skyrunners and one of a single Warlock Skyrunner, Behareth, Eldred Ulthran, a Farseer Skyrunner, as well as 3 units of Rangers in the troop slot, 6 Dire Avengers, 5 Striking Scorpions, and 3 Wraith Lords to make use of that floating Ulthway reroll to hit or wound. Within the Fast Attack slot, 10 Swooping Hawks, a Viper, and 9 Wind Riders, followed up by 3 Support Weapon D Cannons in the Heavy Support slot, to make use of all of the Ulthway synergies with Guardian units. This would be a style of list I'd be a little bit worried about the Ultramarines being able to face, given that the Ultramarines are going to play very straight up, whereas a hit-and-run style list like Eldari could potentially run rings around them and not give them any targets to shoot at with their immense firepower. Especially with all those D cannons, a pretty good profile at shooting Redemptor Dreadnoughts, but I think that these 3 Wraith Lords are probably going to end up being a liability for the Ulthway army. That's basically their front line, and unfortunately those are units that do not like to get shot at by Astraeus or Macroplasma Incinerators. Importantly, the inclusion of that Sanctic Halo Captain can also throw a little bit of a wrench in the works of these relatively passive styles of armies, given that that guy with the Imperium Sword can reroll his charge rolls, and the Sanctic Halo gives him a built-in 3+ invulnerable save. So if you don't have Mortal Wounds or Invulnerable Save Ignoring, it can be very much like an 8th edition style Space Marine Captain, extremely difficult to kill. That guy can survive a bunch of incoming attacks, tie up your units, and potentially be killing them with that Relic Blade. Interestingly, the Sanctic Halo also gives him a deny, which gives the list a little bit of fight against Psychic Interrogation, since normally you would be Psychic Interrogating the forward-most character, and if Ryan just plays this Captain at the front of his formation, he can be guaranteed to get at least 1 deny on whatever Psyker is coming in. I'm sure that was also useful in this matchup against Ulthway, although they did have the Ghost Helm of Alashazir, which can make their psychic actions undeniable. Even so, this still was a close win to Ryan, 80 points to 72, and that put him in the finals against Mark Meng and his Imperial Knights Freeblade Lance. This Freeblade Lance brought a Knight Paladin alongside a smorgasbord of smaller armigers, 2 Moiraxes, 1 with 2 Lightning Locks, and 1 with 2 Graviton Pulsars, a grand total of 4 Armiger Warglaves, and a set of 3 Helverins. Now, this game was streamed over on the Xenos Petting Zoo Twitch. I was going to recommend here that you go check them out on Twitch. It is twitch.tv/XenosPettingZoo, but it doesn't look like they have VOD recording, so you can't watch the game there. And their YouTube channel doesn't have anything on it either, so we're out of luck, I guess. Sorry, everybody. Because it was an absolute nail-biter of a game and came down to a 73 to 72 point score in favor of Ryan. That put him at 5-0 and first place over the Riverside Classic GT with those gorgeous Ultramarines. This game must have been really interesting. I think typically Knights are pretty advantaged in the super heavy fight, given that oftentimes they have a breadth of high range and high damage shooting that can go into other super heavies as long as they can see them. The biggest downside for super heavies that Knights often suffer from is obviously you can draw a line of sight through them even through obscuring terrain, and that means that Knights can put so much damage on target in the first turn that they oftentimes can knock down an opposing super heavy in one go. That said, with only the Knight Paladin as the big Knights and everything else relying on Armiger Helverins and Warglaive that have a little bit of trouble engaging with a high survivability long-range attacker like the Astraeus, I can see that Astraeus knocking down potentially 2 Armigers every shooting phase, and there not being too much that the Knights can do back to it. Even so, it sounded like both players played out an incredible game. 73 to 72 is about as close and exciting as you would want out of a finals game for a GT. And with that, we finally have an Ultramarines at 5-0. Huge congratulations to Ryan for taking down the GT. That's a huge deal, especially with a faction that has been touted as one of the worst and least performing in 9th edition 40k. But it goes to show you, I think, that with enough innovation, a little bit of luck, and definitely some skill, you can basically make anything work in the current metagame. We're really in probably what is the most balanced form of competitive 40k that the game has ever seen. And it goes to show you that even though factions are underperforming in the grand scheme of things, it really comes down to individual player experience, and you can still win with basically anything. Even playing competitively currently, I don't think there's many matchups that you would go into and expect one side to win 100% of the time. There's going to be a little bit of variance in there, and most factions have the tools to compete right now. Just whether or not they can do that on a large scale is the question, but certainly over the course of a single GT with a very good player with a good list, everybody's got a pretty good chance. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Big thanks to everyone who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers. All you people are great. I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.